If you plan with a foreigner husband, I think you should also take his culture into consideration.
Well, one little fun fact is that we're getting married in America.
You're a poor Brazilian girl when I'm not here with you. Then you're a rich American when I am.
I'm gonna go find myself a little cabana where I have tons of nice slides and slippers, and man, I got thousands of dollars of watches
And until you understand respect, you're not actually going to understand the truth about Debbie or Colt
or America.
I'm an American!
Ay. Welcome to my studio. My name is Ira and I make video essays about different topics while painting something. If that sounds like something that you would be interested in and you stick around with the video, you end up enjoying it, I highly recommend you click the subscribe button, the little bell notification icon thing. Your engagement helps my self-esteem. A few weeks ago, I posted a poll on my community tab asking you if you watch 90 Day Fiancé, and if you do, to which extent. And I have to admit that the answer really surprised me because I personally love 90 Day Fiancé. It is unironically my favorite reality show of all time. I watch every single season of every single spin-off aside from The Single Life. The Single Life is where all the people that how do I say this diplomatically? Personally
Can't stand.
Honestly, I find 90 Day Fiancé to be such a good show. Some of the couples seem so great and genuine and supportive, and their storylines can be incredibly heartwarming. It's also very funny and shocking and ridiculous at times. But despite of my genuine love for the show, I completely recognize the problematic nature of some of the couples and their interactions. And today we will be talking about just that. But to start off on a happier or more positive note, I want to start this video by giving a shout out to Feed Me Art, who created this beautiful piece while listening to one of my videos. I always watch, or rather listen to my favorite creators while I paint, and so it makes me really happy that someone is doing the same with my content. So thank you so much, Feed Me Art, for sending me this piece, and if anyone else out there likes to doodle or sculpt or paint or do anything creative while you're watching or listening to my content, then please feel free to DM them to me because it'll make me so happy. That being said, without any further ado, let's paint an essay. I'm sure many of you have some knowledge of what 90 Day Fiancé is, but in case you don't, let's start with a brief presentation of what is the premise of the show and the shift it's taken since the first seasons. 90 Day Fiancé is a reality show on TLC that began airing in 2014 and showed the journey of US citizens who are engaged to a non-American partner. The couples would be united in a K-1 visa process, which is the process of bringing a non-American fiancé to the States and marrying them. The couple has 90 days to get legally married from the moment the fiancé lands in the States, so 90 Day Fiancé. The show follows the couples throughout their struggles of adjustment, the cultural dialogues and differences, and the process of planning a wedding in a relatively short period of time. While some couples use the 90 days as a trial period or a period of deciding whether they want to eventually get married, it should be mentioned that the K-1 visa process ideally was made for couples who have established a relationship, potentially live together for some capacity or period of time, and have decided to get married before applying for the visa. However, a common conflict or struggle portrayed on the show is couples who have been in a relationship for a relatively short period of time and have barely spent any actual time together, making their storylines predominantly about how difficult it is to get to know someone and choose to marry them in 90 days. I felt that it's important to mention that this is not how the K-1 visa process should ideally work. As the show became more popular and more spin-offs were introduced, from Happily Ever After and What Now, which follows couples who were previously on 90 Day Fiancé. There's Before the 90 Days, which follows a couple's journey towards an engagement proposal. There's The Other Way, which follows couples where the American is the one who moves to their partner's country. There's The Single Life, which follows the people who shouldn't be given any more attention, but c'est la vie, as well as spin-offs dedicated entirely to couples or individuals that were previously on the show, and so on and so forth. As the show and its many spin-offs progress, there is an obvious shift in the tone of the show, with storylines focusing less on struggling to adjust to a new environment, the excitement of starting a life together and planning a wedding, and more on family feuds, secrets, and casting more and more couples that make the viewers play Who is a Fraud bingo. In other words, the storylines and casting of the show would turn to introduce more and more couples who bring the drama. Before we move on to discuss specific couples and their extremely problematic interactions, I'd like to start by discussing the issue of cultural ignorance and the level of contempt many Americans on the show seem to have towards non-American cultures. From a belief that everyone in the world dreams of coming to America and no one could possibly have a preference for living anywhere else.
Do you ever think you'd be in America?
It was her dream before she got here, I think.
That was never my dream.
What, to come to America?
Yes. Why do you think that was my dream?
Because everybody from Ukraine wants to come to America.
Oh, Juvie. It's kind of same stereotypes like many people think that American is so stupid.
I'm searching for the American dream. I had the Spanish dream.
There's no such thing as a European dream.
To showing their contempt to other customs, to literally believing in being superior due to their American nationality, the entitlement of some Americans on the show is outrageous. While it is obvious that people on the show don't represent all Americans, and in fact it is mostly American people who criticize these behaviors on social media, it does lead to a valuable discussion on the manner of which some Americans view themselves in comparison to other countries, and the ignorant stereotypes that are applied to non-American people. Some Americans on the show seem to believe they are entitled to behave anyway and say whatever they want, at times literally finishing a sentence with "Americans can do what they want," or simply by stating "I'm an American."
In America, we do what the we want and we say what the we do what we want. We do what we want.
I'm an American!
They show clear contempt of other cultures, from traditional clothes to living conditions to the local foods.
Eat any of it.
You know, like when you go to a dinner and you have to say, what's that, what's that, what's that, what's that, what's that?
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like Andrea's over here eating that bread with the pork fat on it like it was nothing. I'm like,
It's disgusting.
That's disgusting.
I wonder if the reason they eat pork fat is because it's like cheap and it's like almost like the scraps. That's
You're in
why.
a poor country, dude.
They're eating peasant food.
When you go to a dinner and have to say, what's that, what's that, what's that, it's not good. Isn't the local cuisine one of the most incredible things you want to experience and explore when you travel to a new place? And calling traditional meals scraps and peasant food as if they were insulted being served this? Most traditional meals around the world were originated as peasant foods, meals people would put together from what they had, including so-called scraps, so that they don't waste anything. And with time, those meals became central dishes of the local cuisine that people were proud to cook during gatherings and to present to guests. The worst thing is that after the scene was aired and the family was asked if they feel that what they have said was wrong, they basically doubled down.
Is it embarrassing to you at all? Do you regret anything you said?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So where does this contempt come from? Much of the contempt some Americans display on the show seems to originate from an idea of American exceptionalism. Basically, the idea that the United States of America is the pinnacle of freedom and independence, and other nations, specifically ones where the culture is significantly different, are ipso facto anti-freedom and liberty. This contempt is also a manifestation of ethnocentrism, the belief that my culture of origin is morally and functionally the most correct one. One of the expressions of this that is often dismissed is when an American woman criticizes the culture of her non-American partner, dubbing it as sexist. While from a Western perspective we note and criticize sexism, there is an argument about making those criticisms in a non-Western culture. And while many people would agree with the American woman proudly stating that American women don't bow down to men, others would ask, why would a person who wants the modern Western idea of a 50-50 partnership kind of relationship even find a partner whose culture has different ideas of gender roles and status and try to force them and their families to accept the American idea of equality? Personally, I wouldn't want to be in a submissive position to my partner either, which is why I wouldn't get into a relationship with someone who expects me to be. From my point of view, people are allowed to have these preferences, meaning that if someone was raised in a culture where equality of gender is not even a topic of discussion, I wouldn't expect them to see gender equality the way I do. The validity of criticism over different traditions in non-Western countries, especially criticisms that focus on the morality of non-Western culture, is something that is dealt with in the field of anthropology. The philosophy of cultural relativism, for example, argues argues that one culture can't be judged according to the moral values of another. Rather, an effort should be made to understand the culture from within, from its internal moral values. This philosophy also certainly faces its own criticism from other anthropological schools of thought, and it's in my opinion a fascinating dialogue to explore on its own. So if you'd want to see a dedicated video on cultural relativism, let me know in the comment section, or we could have a vote over in the community tab. So now let's move on to discuss some specific couples, their behavior, and speculate as to where this behavior stems from and how it is manifested outside of the show. The American cast members we will discuss in this video all have a lot in common. In fact, some would even say that they seem to fall into a very specific trope. The trope being an American, often middle-aged, who decides to look for companionship abroad due to their lack of luck in cultivating and/or maintaining a relationship with another American partner. The partners they find often live in developing countries, and their reasoning for choosing to look for a partner in those countries often boils down to them thinking that people from these countries have better family values and/or are more passionate and exotic. It is not until we get to see their interactions with their partners that a certain pattern of behavior can be seen, and a speculation as to why the American chose their partner can be made. The American very often displays a behavior of control, entitlement, and in many cases a double standards towards their non-American partners, which makes it seem as though they intentionally targeted an individual from a developing country because they believe that individual would be more forgiving of mistreatment or would generally be more subservient. This is of course a speculation that is based on fragments of interactions shown on an edited television show, which is something important to keep in mind. That being said, many interactions, confessional segments, behaviors, and general attitudes from some of the American cast members on the show can be used to make an interesting discussion in regards to the concept of cultural imperialism and a belief in Western superiority. The question of exploitation in cross-border relationships hadn't been explored much, especially academically. In fact, I've never had so much trouble finding relevant bibliography as I did when researching the subject. The discussions we often see in regards to this topic emphasizes the risks of exploitation a North American or Western partner faces when dating an individual from a different country that is perceived as poorer, while the latter is always seen as winning the bargain or getting the long end of the stick, because they get to improve their circumstances. However, there isn't sufficient discourse regarding the exploitation and ill treatment individuals from developing countries may suffer at the hands of their Western partners, and how common power imbalances are in relationships between partners who belong to different age groups, social classes, financial situations, and race. This is something that becomes extremely obvious when observing the dynamic of several 90-day fiancé couples, starting with the question of who is exploiting whom. From the point of view of the American partners and their friends and family, the answer is obvious. It is the American who is risking being exploited. This is demonstrated by the fact that the most common conflict in the great majority of couples on every single season of the 90-day fiancé multiverse is that of intentions. And this is a conflict that often starts as soon as the couple is introduced to the show. The question that is asked ad nauseum is whether the non-American is in this relationship for the right reasons, or if they are acting with fraudulent intent and just want to take advantage of the American for resources and of course the coveted green card. This question is brought up both by the American partner themselves during a confessional segment and/or by their friends and family who voice their concern. Interestingly, but also unsurprisingly, the moral judgment is almost always reserved to the non-American partners, as even when we see an American partner who is much older and more financially stable than their non-American partner, no one ever seems to ask them if they are in this relationship for the right reasons.
You gotta see this woman, Jack. She's beautiful.
Where's your future wife coming from?
She's from Cebu, which is in the Philippines, which is actually where my ex-wife is from, so I'm doing the same thing again.
I'll say. How old is she?
She's 19. She's young, and you know, when she came after me, I really didn't think about age, but every once in a while, I look at this beautiful young thing, but she loves me, Jack, she loves me. She loves me from head to the bottoms of my toes.
Understand.
And I've dated enough women here that they don't get it.
You're a nice person. I just don't want to see you get messed up.
I'm not going to get messed up. If you have an ironclad prenup and no children, how can you go wrong?
There's always something in there that you didn't see that can go wrong.
Yes, because the wealthy, middle-aged white dude is the one we should be concerned about. Certainly not the 19-year-old girl that he's bringing in to live with him away from Oliver's support system in the Philippines. There also seems to be a double standard as to what exactly are the right reasons and who do they apply to. It is the non-American that is often interrogated by their partner's friends and family and even by their partner themselves. They are perceived as having the obligation to continuously prove that they are in the relationship for love and companionship. And if they dub any other reason by saying, I came here because I love my partner and because I think I will have better opportunities here, they are scrutinized for not being in it for the right reasons. The American partner can just talk about how attractive and young their partner is, and no one in their social circle bats an eye. The main criticism some 90 Day Fiancé cast members received from viewers, though, is that their intentions behind seeking out younger partners from a developing country are mostly sexual. This brings up a very important conversation regarding what sex tourism actually is and the philosophies it is rooted in. The cast member who most noticeably has been accused of this is Ed, who was 54 when he first appeared on season 4 of Before the 90 Days alongside his then 23-year-old partner, Rose. The reason Ed didn't sit right with a majority of the viewers is because, despite of his words, he seemed to care very little for Rose and her son Prince, and was mainly focused on being intimate with her. The best example of this dichotomy between his words and his actions is when he told Rose he is coming to meet her so that he could spend time with her, her family, and mostly her son, who he claimed to care a lot about and want to take care of. However, after spending just one night in Rose's house, he indicated to her that the conditions in which he and her family are living are too uncomfortable for him, and he wants to spend the rest of his trip in a vacation resort, an invitation he only extended to Rose. So he essentially presented himself as a caring father figure and ended up separating Rose from her son after just one day. Then there is the issue of Ed's demands from Rose. He tells her to shave her legs because he doesn't like body hair. The gifts he gives her are lingerie and swimwear, as well as mouthwash because her breath isn't pretty. When Rose tells him this is due to an ulcer she has and not her oral hygiene, Ed doesn't offer to take her to the doctor or seems to ask any questions about how he can help. At least no such concern was shown on the show, and I personally doubt it was just edited out. He mostly seems disappointed that there is no quick and easy fix to her breath. Then there is the fact that he tells her he wants to wait with intimacy until she's comfortable, but during the confessionals, he actually says he doesn't want to sleep with her until she gets tested for STDs. When he asks her to get an STD test, Rose says that she will get one if he does as well, which he refuses due to feeling uncomfortable to get medical testings done in the Philippines. Then during the tell-all episode at the end of the season, Rose, who had since broken up with Ed, talks about how disrespected he made her feel and reveals that after their breakup, Ed reached out to Rose and told her that he could send her money to help with her dire financial situation if she sends him nudes. Ed denied this, but I personally believe Rose, and her visible distress when talking about this really broke my heart. The suspicion towards some cast members in regards to seeking out partners with sexually exploitative motives certainly isn't just reserved to the male cast. There's also 52-year-old Stephanie from season 8 who exhibited a dynamic of controlling behavior over her then 27-year-old Belizean partner Ryan. Stephanie repeatedly describes the level of which she supports Ryan financially, from sending him and his family money as they were struggling with COVID, to buying him expensive gifts such as designer sunglasses and $3,000 watches, and even secretly paying his salary through an arrangement she has with his employer, making him 100% dependent on her. Stephanie can be seen holding her support over her partner's head as well as over his family's heads, going as far as reaching out to his mother at one point in the relationship and demanding she pays back the money Stephanie sent her as a gift. Her motivation for doing this was because his mother didn't thank her enough and showed her the respect that she thought she deserved from her.
When I share my money, I kind of expect, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Like you want my mom to be bowing down, A thanks is a thanks. It comes from the heart, Like she says, thank you very much, Steph.
No, it wasn't. Yes, thank you very much. It was just, yeah, thanks. And I had to reach out to her.
That was enough to get many people upset, but the thing that got many viewers furious is Stephanie's choice of words when her and Ryan got into a fight in Belize. Ryan ended up leaving the resort they were staying in, and Stephanie was seen frantically looking for her mother's ring, repeating that he would have stolen it because he knows that is what would hurt her the most. As she goes through the room, we see that Ryan left many, if not most, of Stephanie's gifts, and she points out that this is likely because he chose to steal her ring instead. Then, after finding that the ring is safe and sound, Stephanie makes sure to say, "I don't care if he stole anything else," as if it's a given that he would steal from her. She then goes on to call him, thanking him for not stealing her ring, which Ryan obviously takes offense to, which starts another fight, during which she says,
This is over. Off and died, Ryan. You know what? I'm gonna go find myself a little cabana where I got tons of nice slides and slippers, and man, I got thousands of dollars of watches and tons of clothes.
Stephanie saying that she will find a cabana boy to give all of those expensive gifts to got many people understandably upset and caused speculations as to whether Stephanie is a sex tourist. These speculations only got heavier when the very next day Stephanie brought in Ryan's cousin, Harris, who she had already slept with once before, to spend the rest of her vacation days with her. And it didn't take her more than one day to extend an invitation to Harris to come live with her in America. So, assuming we agree that these two cases indicate a certain level of sexual exploitation, is it fair to label it as sex tourism? Sex tourism traditionally is a term applied to the act of traveling abroad with the main attraction the traveler has in mind is the local prostitution. It had been argued that sex tourism does not apply to situations where there is an established relationship between the traveler and the local. However, there is a gray area in regards to relationships between Western expats and tourists who target younger, attractive individuals with difficult financial circumstances in developing or Eastern European countries. This gray area exists when the relationship is one where the partners don't have equal power, and the Western partner is aware that their resources will be a motivator for their partner to stay in a relationship that is otherwise harmful to their well-being. Essentially, if we look at these relationships as belonging to that gray area, we can even go further and say that not only is targeting an individual under these circumstances with the aim of cultivating a relationship with them can be a manifestation of sex tourism or romance tourism, but targeting them with the aims of marriage maybe as well. This issue is partially explored in a 2004 article that focuses on the sexual exploitative nature of so-called marriage agencies, which aim to introduce Western men to women from former Soviet Union countries. In this article, Donna Hughes, a professor in the Department of Women's Studies in the University of Rhode Island, describes how women are being advertised to Western men on introduction services. The marriage agencies use sexist stereotypes of Russian women to market them to Western men. The descriptions of the advertised women emphasizes their willingness to serve men and put themselves in a subservient role. According to the owner of a Moscow-based introduction service, the attraction of Russian girls is that they are not so feminized, not so business-minded. They think about home, kids, and their appearance. Western women want to have careers, demand cash, have expensive divorces, but Russian women are very pretty, there's plenty of them, and they're not spoiled and not too demanding. Even though this marriage service is Moscow-based, and so you might think that this is how these women would describe themselves, the services are actually describing a product to a targeted audience, i.e., these types of services take advantage of how the Western men who seek their services view women in general. Western women are ruined by feminism and their development of financial independence. All Russian women want is to please you, raise your children, clean your house, and maintain their appearance. With them, you won't have the pesky issue of having them ask you for too much. And indeed, if you don't give them much, they won't even inconvenience you with an expensive divorce. In reality, Hughes points out how women would be horrified when they would see how they're being described by these agencies, as well as how they are exploited by them by having their pictures used without permission and even their addresses given out for a price. Also included are the kind of advances these women end up receiving from Western men, which highlight exactly what these men are interested in. Some agencies focus predominantly on vulnerable women, either extremely young or in critical financial situations, and what ends up happening in many cases is that these women are trafficked out of their countries and find themselves in abusive relationships. Now, of course, no one on 90 Day Fiancé claims to have met their partner through a service such as this, but this doesn't mean they don't perceive their partners in a similar way or they aren't interested in them for similar reasons. We might never know because thankfully they don't have to answer us to being in this relationship with the right intentions, huh? As we previously explored, this is by no means a men's issue either. The rise of wealthy middle-aged white women looking for sexual adventures in developing countries had been on the rise in recent years. In an article discussing the rise of romance tourism in Caribbean countries, Lauren Johnson of the Department of Anthropology in the University of South Florida addresses the connection between tourism-dependent countries and the rates of prostitution. Johnson explains how, as a country relies more on tourism, local communities must provide more layers to create the kind of vacation experience that attracts tourists to their country. With the rise of female tourists seeking out to fulfill a sexual fantasy during their vacation, local men in turn adapt a performative persona to meet that demand. Female tourists have suggested that they seek relationships with young, fit, natural black men who embody the type of island maleness that is outside of their reach at home. The men, in turn, use their bodies in order to create the fantasy that the women wish to maintain as a part of their vacation stays. The article discusses the power dynamic between the female tourist and the so-called beach boy, explaining that despite of the fact that the men put on a show to attract women who are either much older or not conventionally attractive by sweet-talking them and complimenting them, it is the female tourists who have the power and control in the relationship, as they ultimately decide which local they will spend their time with, spoil with fancy dinners and gifts, and even send money to when they eventually go back home. Additionally, Johnson explores how the reliance on tourism for national financial stability increases the vulnerability of a country at a state and communal levels. Since the most profitable businesses are typically internationally owned, the local community is financially disadvantaged. The dominance of tourism over the economy also leads to significant social disadvantages by the introduction of tourist protective legislation. Harassment laws, which are introduced for the safety of tourists, often end up putting locals in a vulnerable position where they are seen as second places after tourists in the eyes of the justice system. Generally, the article shows how countries, in this case Jamaica and other Caribbean countries whose economies heavily rely on tourism, find themselves at the mercy of the tourists. It causes the community to shape itself in some ways based on the desires and demands of the tourists. In this way, sex tourism may seem like a reciprocal system, and in some ways it is, but there is a massive power imbalance that has to be considered, which makes it nothing short of colonial. The hyper-focus of intentions on 90 Day Fiancé is not only hypocritical in some cases, but it's also incredibly confusing, as similarly to sex or romance tourists, some of the American partners on the show who demand proof of their partner's devotion and speculate about them being in the relationship with good intentions, simultaneously hold the idea of financial stability or going to the States over their partners' heads. They basically demand a performance from their partners while being extremely aware of why they likely stay in the relationship. This sets a precedent of high control dynamic where the non-American is expected to tolerate being mistreated and the American believes they have the upper hand and so they can demand more from their partners than they themselves want to provide. From the level of respect they demand from their non-American partners, which in many cases just seems like obedience, versus the level of respect they feel they owe back, which is virtually none at times, to demanding their partners to get tested for UTIs while refusing to do so themselves, to demanding access to their phones and monitoring their interactions while having inappropriate interactions themselves. The double standards some American cast members allow themselves to have is truly mind-blowing. Let's look at some examples. We see this sort of behavior with Angela and Michael, who I feel are one of the most notorious couples on the show. The couple first appeared on season 2 of Before the 90 Days when Angela was 52 and Michael was 30 years old, and continued to appear on several seasons of the show. The different seasons show Angela going to visit her partner in Nigeria as well as their interactions when they are apart, and Angela's behavior towards Michael is nothing short of volatile. Angela expresses her mistrust of her partner continuously, yet at the same time seems to hold her American nationality over Michael's head whenever they have a disagreement. She constantly threatens her partner that if he doesn't behave, he won't be coming to America. So there is this dichotomy between, I sure hope this person isn't with me for the green card, and the, if you're a good boy, I can make your dreams come true. Angela even used the American flag when she first proposed to him, and bizarrely ended the proposal by saying, you are coming to America, instead of actually asking the question of, will you marry me? However, every time Angela would get upset at Michael, she would threaten to cancel the wedding. She would rarely barely let him speak when she would let her temper get out of control, and tell him off for being disrespectful when he would just try to defend himself. Then there are Lisa and Usman, who appeared on season 5 of Before the 90 Days. Lisa, who was 53, was exhibiting extremely high control behavior over her then 30-years-old fiancé Usman. Usman, who was trying to build a music career, was forced to change music videos because Lisa was upset the videos included female models. She would get upset at female fans, calling them lovesick puppies as they take selfies with him. She would lash out at his colleagues, friends, and family members whenever they would bring up her controlling attitude. Viewers got upset at Lisa's level of hostility and aggression towards Usman on the show, but they became completely outraged when Lisa was accused by Usman of calling him the N-slur, which was supposedly edited out by TLC. This kind of dynamic sets the stage for an incredibly unequal relationship where the American use their resources to keep their partners in their place. The non-Americans must prove themselves, not only to their partners but also their friends and family. They must be on their best behavior and treat the American with the utmost respect, while at the same time being belittled by the American, shouted at, disrespected, called names, and threatened to be left if they don't comply. If the non-American tries to defend themselves, they are berated even further for talking back. Many times they will be demanded to give their American partner access to their phone. They will be required to answer the phone when they are apart and give a valid reason for why they weren't available if they didn't. We, the viewers, don't see the Americans who display this level of high control and possessiveness to also be held to the same standard. And there had been cases where the American partner demands full access to their partner's phone to make sure their partner isn't having any inappropriate conversations, while they themselves are guilty of doing the same. Generally, double standards indicate a belief that rules don't apply equally. But the question that should be asked in this case is, why don't the rules apply equally? Why do these individuals believe they are entitled to treat their partners this way? And more importantly, would they behave this way had their partners been from the same country? Or did they intentionally pick a partner in a position that would make them more inclined to tolerate it? If we speculate that the non-American partners were also taking advantage of their American partners for resources or the possibility to better their circumstance, why should we feel sorry for them? And on a grander scale, that people who get into relationships with financial motivations deserve to be mistreated because that's a part of the deal. While I know that my opinion on this is probably an unpopular one, I think we have to keep in mind that a union based on romantic love is a relatively new and predominantly a Western idea. Historically, marriages have been done for many reasons other than romantic, that being political, financial, communal, and so on. I personally don't see anything wrong with two people entering a relationship if they aren't what we call genuinely in love, in the sense that if a person with resources seeks out someone younger and attractive and proposes to support them, there isn't anything pathological or morally corrupt in their wishes, as long as the partners share mutual respect and seek to improve each other's lives as well as their own. In this sense, a system of reciprocity in a sugar baby relationship, despite the social stigma, I don't see reasons to point fingers. The issue for me arises when either of the partners abuses their privilege to take advantage of the other, either when the more financially stable one holds their resources and support as means of controlling, disrespecting, and belittling their partner because they know that their circumstance is dire enough that they would likely just sit and take it, as well as if a person with lesser means use their partner for money in a manipulative and harmful way and treat them badly. In the cases we explore today, I will also admit that I don't believe the non-Americans are head over heels in love with the American partners. That's just my opinion. But they still treat them with much more respect than they themselves receive. So in this sense, it is clear to me at least that they are the ones being taken advantage of. The thing that bothers me about the stigma the non-Americans or generally non-Westerners are faced with is that they're always painted as users, while their usually older, typically wealthier partners as seen as naive and too trusting. It indicates an approach many have towards developing countries in general, that they rely so heavily on support from Western countries because they are incapable of taking care of themselves, while it is so often the case that many developing countries have suffered centuries of being exploited by the West. We as a society tend to focus on Nigerian prince scams and mail-order bride services to categorize individuals from developing or Eastern European countries as thieving, conniving people who would rather scam hardworking people rather than earn their money doing honest work. And I'm not saying that scams don't exist or that if they do, it's the fault of the victim. There have also been cases on 90 Day Fiancé where the Americans were clearly scammed, and it was very sad to witness. But these cases are often used to push a racist and xenophobic propaganda, a tale of white people beware. And this notion, I believe, doesn't do anything to protect people from being exploited, but rather makes us turn a blind eye when the wealthy take advantage of the poor, when the privileged take advantage of the non-privileged. Many people look at someone like Rose and say she wasn't in it for love, she was using him, so she deserves it, but ignore completely that Ed wasn't in it for love either, that he was absolutely using her and mistreating her in almost every way. Similarly, as young women are exploited and mistreated via the matchmaking services discussed by Hughes, and young men are exploited via the tourist economy in the Caribbean islands as discussed by Johnson. In conclusion, despite being an edited and semi-produced reality show, 90 Day Fiancé had been used to create a dialogue in regards to the cultural confrontations between Americans and non-Americans, both in a micro setting of a relationship between two people and their families, as well as a macro setting of how Americans and non-Americans view and interact with each other's cultures. While the volatile and harmful dynamics I highlighted throughout this video certainly don't represent all bicultural couples in the world, and not even on the show, they can be seen as emblematic of grand-scale issues such as ignorance, cultural contempt, and exploitation, and can lead to an exploration of why these issues exist and self-reflection of how we may contribute to them by having stigmas, stereotyping, and vilifying people based on their culture, race, or nationality. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I really hope that you found the topic interesting and that you enjoyed the painting process of this piece. Let me know what you think about the topics discussed in the video. What do you think about the painting? If there are any interpretations you want to give it, if there's anything you want to add that I have missed, if there are any couples that I discarded that you feel I should have addressed. Thank you once again for making it this far. I really do appreciate it, and stay safe, and I'll see you next time.